I've watched a man stand still for so long that I forgot he was breathing. That's the part nobody believes when I tell them. They want the shouting. They want the moment somebody drew a blade or a door got kicked or a woman screamed. But that's not how it happened. The truth of that night was quiet. So quiet you could hear the candle wax tick as it cooled. And in all that quiet, one man stood between a grieving, furious woman and a locked door, and he did not move. His name was Sergeant Bram Aldecott. And before I tell you what he did, I have to tell you where we were, and why a single iron key mattered more than any of us understood at the time. Let me start at the beginning. Valemont is an old palace, older than the family that lives in it, some say. It sits up on the gray shoulder of the hills above the river, and in winter the fog comes up off the water and swallows the lower gardens whole, so that from the high windows you'd swear the place was floating. I'd worked there 2 years by then. I was young, 19, maybe 20. They'd taken me on as an underguard, which is a polite way of saying I carried things, stood where I was told, and kept my mouth shut. Mostly I kept my mouth shut. That was the part I was best at. The old king had died 11 days before any of this. King Aldous. He'd been sick a long while, the kind of sick where the whole house goes hushed and the doctors stop pretending and the family starts arriving in black. When he finally went, it was in the small hours, and I remember the bell tolling out over the fog and how strange it sounded, muffled, like the whole valley had put its hand over its mouth. He left a son, Prince Tobias, who they called the Prince of the Vale, the way the heir was always called in Marenhull. Tobias was barely 18, good lad by all accounts, though I never had cause to speak to him direct. Quiet, bookish, not the sort you'd pick out of a room. He'd been away at the time his father went out at the northern estate, a full day's ride, maybe more in the weather we were having. So the throne was empty, and the heir was on the road, and the palace was full of people who suddenly had nothing to do but wait and worry and talk. And then there was her, the Dowager Duchess Seraphine, the king's second wife, not Tobias's mother. His mother had died when he was small, and the old king married again some years on. Seraphine wasn't a cruel woman, I want to be fair about that. I've heard people tell this story since and make her into some kind of villain out of a play, all hard eyes and poison. She wasn't that. She was a woman who'd spent 15 years being the most important person in any room she walked into. And now the man who'd made her important was dead, and she could feel the whole house turning, slow as a great ship, away from her and toward a boy who wasn't even there yet. That does something to a person. I understand it better now than I did then. So the fog, the bell, the empty throne, that's the where and the when, now the key. In the east wing of Valemont, up a short flight of stairs that went nowhere else, there was a door, plain oak banded in iron, nothing grand about it. Behind it was a room they called the sealed study. It was the old king's private room, and it held the things a king doesn't keep where just anyone can find them. The royal seal, the actual physical seal, the stamp that made a paper law instead of just paper, the treaty boxes, the succession papers, and the will. The king's last will, which nobody had read yet, because the only one allowed to open that room was the one who held the key. And the key belonged only to the Prince of the Vale. That was the old rule, older than King Aldous, older than the door maybe. When a king died, the key to the sealed study passed to the heir and to no one else. Not the regent, not the council, not the widow. The heir. It was the first thing he touched as the man in charge, that iron key, cold in his palm. It meant the room was his, and what was in the room was his, and the kingdom was his to answer for. There was a whole ceremony around it in the old days, I'm told, though by our time it had shrunk down to a quiet formality. The key would be handed over by the captain of the guard the moment the heir arrived and was recognized. Until then, the key stayed with the guard. And the guard that week was Bram Aldecott. I should tell you about him, because everything that happened that night came out of what kind of man he was, and you can't understand the one without the other. Aldecott was old for the work, past 50, which is ancient for a guardsman, Most men his age had moved on to soft posts gatekeeping, training the young ones, sitting in a warm room with a ledger. Not him. He'd done 30 years of it, and he stood his watches like a man half his age, straight-backed, still, the kind of still that isn't stiff but settled, like a stone that's found its place in a wall and means to stay there. He had a gray mustache he kept trimmed sharp and a face that didn't give much away. The young lads were a little afraid of him. I was a little afraid of him. But here's the thing about Aldecott. He never raised his voice. In 2 years I never once heard him shout. He'd correct you with a look or a single quiet word, and somehow that landed harder than any sergeant's bellow. He had a code, and you could feel it on him like a coat. He believed in the watch. He believed a man's post was a kind of promise, and a promise wasn't a thing you negotiated. You kept it or you weren't a man worth the name. That sounds grand when I say it now. He'd never have said it like that. He'd have just stood there and shown you. The morning after the king died, the captain, Captain Voss, a decent enough man, a bit too fond of his own comfort, handed Aldecott the key to the sealed study. I was there for it, standing my own little post by the stair. I saw it pass hand to hand. Voss said something like, "You hold this till the prince comes. Day or 2 at most. You know the rule." And Aldecott said, "I know it." That was all. He took the key and he hung it on a cord under his collar against his chest where you couldn't see it, and he took up the post outside the sealed study door. He didn't have to stand there himself. He could have set one of us on it. But he didn't. He stood it himself, every hour the rule allowed, and when he was relieved to sleep, he made sure the man who took over knew the one thing that mattered. The door opens for the Prince of the Vale, no one else, not for any reason, not for anyone. The first day that was easy. Nobody tried the door. The household was busy with grief and arrangements, with the funeral preparations and the messengers riding out and the black cloth going up over the mirrors. The sealed study sat quiet up its little stair, and Aldecott stood his watch, and the key lay cold against his chest. It was the second day the Duchess came. I remember it because the fog had finally lifted that afternoon, and there was a thin, watery sun coming through the east windows, the first we'd seen in a week, and it lit up the dust in the air and made the whole corridor go gold for an hour. I was on the stair post, a few steps down from Aldecott. I had a good view of him and of the corridor below, where the household came and went. She came up the corridor slow. The Duchess always moved slow, not because she was frail, she wasn't, but because slow is how you move when you've never in your life had to hurry for anyone. She had 2 of her own women with her, trailing a step behind. She was in mourning black, of course, but good black, the kind that costs more than my year's pay, and her face was composed in that careful way grief gets when it's also doing some thinking. She came to the foot of the little stair and looked up at Aldecott, and he came to attention proper the way you do for a member of the royal house, heels together, eyes front, a small bow of the head. "Sergeant," she said. "Your Grace." "I'd like to go into my husband's study," she said, simple, reasonable, the voice of a woman asking for something she fully expected to receive because she had never not received a thing she asked for. "There are some letters of mine in there, private ones. I'd like to have them before strangers go through his things. And here's where I want you to understand how hard this was, harder than it sounds, because what she was asking wasn't unreasonable on its face. She'd been the man's wife for 15 years. Of course there'd be letters. Of course she'd want them. Any decent person hearing her would have thought, well, what's the harm? Let the poor woman have her letters. Aldecott didn't move. "I'm sorry, Your Grace, the study's sealed." "I know it's sealed. A little patience in it, the patience you use on a slow servant. That's why I'm asking you to unseal it. You have the key, don't you?" "I'm told you have the key." "I do, Your Grace." Then she held out her hand, not grabbing, just open, palm up, waiting, the way you'd hold your hand out for a thing that was obviously, naturally going to be placed in it. And Aldecott looked at that open hand, and he didn't reach for the cord at his neck, and he said, in that quiet, even voice, "The key passes to the Prince of the Vale, Your Grace. When he comes, it's his to use as he sees fit. Until then, I can't open the door and I can't give up the key. To anyone, I'm sorry." I watched her face when he said it. There was a flicker, just a flicker of pure surprise. I don't think anyone had told her no in a very long time. It crossed her face quick and then she put it away, smoothed it over, the way you'd smooth a wrinkle out of a cloth. "I think you misunderstand me, Sergeant," she said, pleasant, still pleasant. "I'm not asking you to give the key to a stranger. I'm the Duchess. I lived in these rooms. My letters are in there." "I understand, Your Grace. The rule's not about who you are. It's about who holds the room, and the room holds for the prince." "The prince," she said, "is a child." "He's the heir, Your Grace. He's 18 and he's a day's ride away on a bad road, and his father isn't even in the ground yet." Her voice didn't rise. That was the unnerving part. It stayed level the whole way through, just got cooler, like water going clear and cold. "And you'd have me stand outside my own husband's door like a tradesman because a boy who isn't here hasn't given you permission." "I'd have you forgive me," Aldecott said, "but yes, until the prince comes the door stays shut." She looked at him a long moment. The sun was going off the windows by then, the gold draining out of the corridor, and her face went back into the ordinary gray light, and I couldn't read it any more. Then she said, very quietly, "You're new to this post." "No, Your Grace, 30 years. "Then you should know better than to make an enemy you don't need." She turned, slow as she'd come, and her women turned with her, and she went back down the corridor without another word. And Aldecott stood there, heels together, eyes front, and let out a breath through his nose. Just one. That was the only sign he gave that any of it had cost him anything. When she was well gone, I came up the stair a step. I was young and I didn't know better than to speak. "Sergeant," I said, "she only wanted some letters." He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes down the corridor where she'd gone. "Maybe she did," he said. "Then couldn't you have, letters? What's the harm in letters?" And he said something I've thought about for 30 years since. He said, "The harm isn't in the letters, lad. The harm's in the open door. The rule doesn't say keep it shut unless someone has a good reason. Everyone's got a good reason. The miser's got a reason, the thief's got a reason, the grieving widow's got a reason. The rule says keep it shut. That's the whole of it. The minute I start deciding whose reason is good enough, the rule's already broken. And then it's just me, standing at a door, doing what I feel like. And I'm not worth the trust of this house if that's all I am." I didn't really understand it then. I nodded like I did, but I didn't. "I understand it now." That was the second day. I thought, the way you do when you're young and stupid, that the matter was settled. She'd asked, he'd said no, that was that. The prince would come, he'd take his key, he'd let her have her letters. Everyone would feel a bit foolish about the whole thing, and we'd all move on. But the prince didn't come on the third day. Word came instead. A rider, mud to the waist, his horse blown. The northern road was out, a bridge gone in the floods, the river up over the banks, the whole low country between us and the northern estate turned to a brown sea. The prince was safe, the rider said, but he was stuck. Could be 3 days, could be 5, could be a week if the rain kept on. A week. I remember the captain's face when he heard it. I remember the way the news went round the house like a draft under a door, and how by evening you could feel the whole place tilting, everyone doing the same quiet arithmetic. A week with no king and no heir, and a sealed room full of the dead man's secrets, and a will nobody had read. And up the little stair, outside the plain oak door, Sergeant Bram Aldecott took up his watch for the night, with an iron key cold against his chest, and settled in to wait. He didn't know yet that the Duchess had done some arithmetic of her own. None of us did. The thing about pressure is that it doesn't come at you the way you expect. You brace for a fist and you get a feather, laid on you so soft you barely feel it, and then another, and another, until one morning you wake up and you can't breathe and you can't say which feather did it. That's how it came at Aldecott. Not all at once. soft and slow, and from a dozen directions, the way a clever person leans on a thing they can't simply break. It started the morning after the writer came with the news about the bridge. I was on the early watch, and I'd brought Aldecott his bread and his cup the way the young ones did for the man holding the long post. He took the cup and thanked me. He always thanked you, which not all of them did, and we stood there a while in the gray before the house woke up. And then Captain Voss came up the corridor. Now Voss outranked Aldecott. That matters. A captain over a sergeant, clear as day. And he came up the little stair looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, which, fair enough, he was about to do a thing he didn't want to do. "Bram," he said, "not sergeant. First name's friendly, the way you start a conversation you mean to win. Bram, we need to talk about the study." "Captain, the prince could be a week, you heard." "I heard." Voss rubbed the back of his neck. "There's papers in there the council needs, treaty correspondence. There's a delegation coming from the south for the funeral and we've nothing to show them about where things stand. The realm doesn't stop because a bridge washed out, you understand me. There's business, real business, and it's all behind that door." "Then it waits for the prince," Aldecott said. "It can't all wait, that's what I'm telling you." Voss dropped his voice, leaned in, friendly still but with an edge coming up under it. "Look, nobody's asking you to hand the key to the Duchess. Forget the Duchess. I'm asking you, your captain's asking you to open the door just the once so the council clerks can take out the papers the realm needs to keep running. You stand right there the whole time. Nothing goes in or out you don't see. We seal it back up after. The boy comes. He's none the wiser, and we've not let the kingdom grind to a halt over a point of ceremony. It was a good argument. I want you to see that. It wasn't the Duchess wanting her letters. It was the captain, the man with rank over him, asking for something that genuinely sounded like the responsible thing. The grown-up thing, keep the realm running. What kind of stubborn old fool puts ceremony over the actual business of the kingdom?" Aldecott was quiet a moment. Then he said, "Who told you the council needs those papers, Captain?" Voss blinked. "What? Which counselor came to you, asked you to come up here and tell me this?" And Voss's face did a thing, just a small thing, a tightening around the eyes. "Does it matter?" "It might. Lord Hessen mentioned it, among others. Look, that's beside the—" "Lord Hessen," Aldecott said, "is the Duchess's cousin." The corridor went very quiet. I stood there with the empty breadcloth in my hands and didn't dare move. "That's a filthy thing to imply," Voss said, but he said it too fast. "I'm not implying anything, Captain. You asked me to open a sealed door. The rule says I open it for the Prince of the Vale and no one else. Not for the council, not for you, not for me, the prince. I'll stand here a week or a month if it comes to it, and I'll be sorry for the inconvenience the whole time, but the door stays shut till the boy's hand is on this key." He touched his chest just once where the cord was. "You can have me up on a charge if you like. I'll stand for it. But I'll stand for it with the door still shut." Voss looked at him a long moment. And I'll give the captain this, he wasn't a bad man, just a soft one, and somewhere in him he knew Aldecott was right, and you could see the shame of it cross his face. "You're a hard old bastard, Bram," he said, but there was no heat in it, almost a kind of respect dragged out of him against his will. "I'm a watchman, Captain," Aldecott said. "It's the same thing most days." Voss left, and that was the first feather. The second came that afternoon, and it was cleverer because it didn't come at Aldecott at all. It came at me. One of the Duchess's women, the younger one, Myra, dark-eyed, pretty in a careful way, found me down by the kitchens when I was off the watch. Just happened to find me the way these things just happen. She was kind to me, asked my name, asked how long I'd served, said it must be hard, the long watches, a young man like me, all that standing about for an old sergeant who probably didn't even thank me for it. And I, fool that I was, glowing a bit under the attention, said, "Oh no, Aldecott always thanked you. He was decent that way." "Is he?" she said, warm. "And he's got the key, hasn't he, the study key, carries it on him." On a cord, I said before my brain caught up with my mouth. Round his. And then I stopped, because I saw all at once what the question was and who'd sent it and what I'd nearly given away. I felt the blood go up my face. Round his what? She said, still warm, still smiling. His belt, I said. On his belt with the others. Which was a lie and not a good one, but it was the best I had, and I think she knew it was a lie, because the warmth went out of her face like a lamp turned down, and she said something about the kitchens being drafty and went away. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the underguard's room listening to the others breathe, and I thought, I am the soft place. I am the way in. An old man standing up there keeping the whole house honest, and I nearly gave away where he keeps the key for a pretty girl asking nice questions. I was ashamed in a way I'd never been ashamed before. In the morning I told Aldecott. I made myself do it. I stood in front of him and I said, Sergeant, one of the Duchess's women asked me where you keep the key, and I nearly told her. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, and the words came out all in a rush and my voice cracked on it like a boy's. He heard me out. He didn't get angry. When I was done, he just looked at me a moment and said, Did you tell her where it really is? No, I lied. I said my belt. Then there's no harm done. And then, because he was the man he was, he added, You came and told me. That's the part that counts, lad. Anyone can make a mistake. Not everyone walks up the stairs the next morning and owns it to a man's face. Remember, you can do that. It'll serve you better than a strong arm the day you need it. I have never forgotten that. I have done a great many things in my life since, because Bram Aldecott told me once that I was the kind of man who walks up the stairs and owns it. I wasn't before he said it. I became it after. That was the second feather, and it had missed, but the third was already in the air. The third was the cook. 2 days into the wait, the food coming up to Aldecott on his long watch started to go strange. First it was just late. Then it was cold. Then on the 5th day, it was a thin barley water and a heel of bread when the rest of the house was getting roast and good cheese, because the southern delegation had arrived for the funeral, and the kitchens were laying on a proper table. Someone had passed a quiet word down to the kitchens. The sergeant on the study door, no need to trouble yourselves over him. He can have what's left. It sounds petty. It was petty. But petty is a weapon when you use it right. A man can stand a hard post on a full belly, stand it cold and hungry and made to feel that the whole house has been told he doesn't matter. That wears on a soul in a way a clean blow never could. They were trying to make him small, trying to make him feel like a stubborn old nuisance everyone had agreed to starve out, so that one cold, hungry night he'd think, what am I even doing this for? Who am I even doing it for? And he'd ease the door open just to make it stop. I started bringing him my own food. I'd take my plate from the underguard's table and carry half of it up the little stair, and we'd split it, him standing his post, me sitting on the top step. He told me not to the first time. Said I needed it more than he did, a growing lad. I told him I'd lost my appetite, which was a lie, and he knew it was a lie, and he let me tell it because he understood that I needed to do the thing more than he needed to refuse it. We talked those nights, more than we ever had. He told me about his 30 years, about a king before this one and a riot at the river gate when he was young, and a winter so cold the fountains froze mid-fall and hung there like glass. He didn't tell stories to make himself big in them. He was hardly ever the hero of his own tales. Mostly they were about other men, men who'd held or men who'd broken, and what it had cost the house either way. I asked him once, it was very late, the candles low, the corridor black past their little glow. I asked him, Sergeant, what if she just outlasts you? What if the prince is 3 weeks, not 1? What if they starve you and shame you and lean on you with the captain and the council and the whole house every day for weeks? Everyone's against you. Nobody's coming. What then? He was quiet a while. Then he said, Then I stand here 3 weeks. But why, honestly? Who'd even know? Who'd thank you? The boy doesn't know you exist. The house thinks you're a fool. If you opened that door tonight, slid those letters out to her, sealed it back up, nobody living would ever know the difference. So why? And he looked at me in the low light and he said, I'd know. That was all, I'd know, like it was the simplest thing in the world, like it answered everything. And the strange part is, the older I get, the more I think it does. There's a kind of man, he said after a bit, thinks honesty is something you do when somebody's watching. He's careful in the light and easy in the dark. And he'll tell you he's a good man, and he half believes it because he's never once been alone in the dark with a thing worth stealing and nobody to see. He turned the cup in his hands. The watch finds out which kind you are. That's all the watch is, really. It's the dark and the thing worth stealing and nobody to see. And every night you find out again. He drank. I'd rather find out I'm the one kind than the other. That's worth more to me than a warm dinner, lad. It's worth more to me than the post, if it comes to that. The 6th day, the Duchess came again. She came in the evening this time, after the funeral feast, when the house was loose and warm with wine and the delegation had gone to their beds and the corridors were dim. She came alone. No women. That was new. She came up the little stair slow as ever, and Aldecott came to attention, heels together, eyes front, the same as the first time, like none of it had touched him, like he hadn't been cold and hungry and shamed for 6 days on her account. "Sergeant," she said. "Your Grace." And then she did the thing I'll never forget. She didn't ask for the key. She didn't ask for the door. She stood there at the top of the stair in the dim, and her composed grief face came apart, just a little, just at the edges, and she said, quiet, almost broken, "There's a letter in there, the last one he wrote me. The week before he got too ill to hold a pen. He told me, he said he'd written down what he wanted said over him. At the end, the words. And they read someone else's words over my husband today, Sergeant, council words. And his are sitting behind that door, in his own hand. And I had to stand at his graveside and listen to strangers, and know that the thing he actually wanted to say was 30 feet away behind a locked door and an old man who wouldn't let me have it." And her voice broke on the last of it, properly broke. And I tell you, standing on the stair below, I felt my own throat close up, because whether it was true or whether it was the cleverest feather yet, I couldn't tell, and that's exactly what made it terrible. It was perfect. It was aimed straight at the one soft place a hard, honest man has left, the fear that his honesty might be a cruelty. That by keeping a rule he might be hurting a grieving woman in the one way that can't be undone. Over words a dead man wanted said. I looked at Aldecott, and for the first time in 6 days I saw him waver. Not move, not reach for the key, but waver, something behind his eyes, a flicker, the stone in the wall shifting just a hair, because this was the argument with no answer. You couldn't reason it away. You couldn't call it the council's trick or the cousin's scheme. It was just a widow and her dead husband's last words and a door, and the man standing at the door being asked to choose between the rule and the one thing the rule had never been written to refuse. And the Duchess saw the waver too. Of course she did. She'd spent 6 days finding it. "Please," she said, just that. The Dowager Duchess of Marenhall, who'd never in her life had to ask a man twice for anything, stood at the top of a dim stair and said please to a hungry old sergeant. "Just the one letter. You can read it first. You can hand it to me yourself and seal the door before I've left the stair. I'm not asking for the key. I'm asking for his words, please." Aldecott's hand moved. It went up slow toward the collar of his coat, toward the cord. And I stood on the stair below with my heart going like a hammer, and I thought, he's going to do it. After everything. 6 days, the cold food, the captain, the cousin, all of it, and it's this. It's the soft, true thing that's going to open the door at last. His fingers found the cord, his fingers found the cord, and then they stopped. I watched them stop. I watched the whole of him stop, the way a man stops at the edge of a thing when some quiet part of him, deeper than thinking, plants its feet. He stood there with his hand at his collar and the cord under his fingers, and the Duchess stood 3 feet away with her face open and broken, and her pleas still hanging in the dim air between them, and for one long breath nobody in that corridor moved at all. Then Aldecott took his hand down from his collar, empty. And he said, in a voice that was lower than before, and gentler than I'd ever heard him, but no less certain for any of that. Your Grace, if your husband wrote those words for you, then they're yours, and no rule on earth should keep them from you, and I'd be ashamed to be the man who did. I believe that. I want you to know I believe it. Something flickered in her face. Hope, maybe, the thing she'd been fishing for. But, he said, I can't be the one to judge whether they're in there. I can't open that door to look, because the looking is the thing I'm sworn against. The minute I open it for a good reason, I've decided I'm the kind of man who opens it, and then it's only ever a matter of finding the right reason, and someone always finds one. So here's what I can do, and it's the only thing I can do, and I'll do it gladly. The prince is on the road. The water's going down. The rider this morning says the bridge can be crossed on foot by week's end, maybe sooner. When the boy comes, he opens that door. And the first thing, the very first thing, Your Grace, before the treaties, before the council, before any business of the realm, the first thing I'll do is stand at his shoulder and tell him there's a letter in there his father wrote for you, and that it should come to you before anything else is touched. I'll put it in his hand if he'll let me. I'll stand witness that it's yours. I'll carry it down the stair to you myself. He paused. But I won't open the door, not for the council, not for the captain, not for me, and I am sorrier for this than I can rightly say, not for you. Because the day the watch starts opening doors for the right people, there are no more closed doors, only doors that haven't met the right person yet. And then this house has nothing it can truly keep, not its papers, not its secrets, not the last words a dying man wrote for his wife. Nothing. The locked door is the only thing that keeps any of it safe, including, Your Grace, that letter. The same rule that's keeping it from you tonight is the rule that's kept it from everyone else who's leaned on this door for 6 days, and there have been others. You'd want it kept from them, so I have to keep it from you too. That's the price of it being kept at all. The corridor was so quiet I could hear the candle ticking. The Duchess looked at him, and here is the thing I did not expect, the thing that stayed with me longer than anything else from that whole strange week. Her broken face, the open, pleading, grief-cracked face she'd worn up the stair, it changed. Not into anger, not into the cold, clear water of the first day. It went still, and then very slowly it went tired, just tired. The face of a woman who has thrown everything she has at a wall and felt the wall not move. And somewhere underneath the disappointment has found, against her own will, a kind of respect for the wall. You really won't, she said, not a question, almost wonder in it. No, Your Grace. 6 days, the food, the captain, my cousin's clerks, Myra and the boy. She glanced down the stair at me when she said the boy, and I felt my face burn because she knew she'd known all along. All of it. And you'd still stand here 3 weeks on barley water before you'd turn that key for me. I would, Your Grace, and I'd think no less of you for any of it. You're grieving. Grieving people reach for what they can. I've reached for foolish things myself in grief. He inclined his head, the small bow, the same as the first morning. But the door stays shut. She was quiet a long moment. Then she said something I've turned over in my mind 1,000 times. She said, my husband chose his guards well, and there was no poison in it. There was something almost like grief in it, a different grief than the one she'd come up the stair carrying. As if, standing there, she'd understood something about the man she'd buried that day, that he'd built a house with men like this one in it, men who couldn't be moved, and that this was a kind of love he'd left behind that she'd never thought to look for. She turned to go. At the top of the stair she stopped, and without looking back she said, when the boy comes, the letter, you'll keep your word. On my life, Your Grace. I believe you will, she said. And she went down the stair, slow as she'd come, and the dim corridor swallowed her, and that was the last time she ever came to the door. The prince came 2 days later. The water went down faster than they'd feared, and Prince Tobias crossed the Mendied Bridge and rode through the gates of Valemont on a gray morning with the fog just lifting, 18 years old and gray-faced with the long road and the grief of it, a boy coming home to a house with no father in it. There was no grand welcome. There wasn't time and nobody had the heart. The captain met him. The council met him. And then Aldecott, who had stood the study door for 8 days on cold food and short sleep, who had not left his post except to be relieved for a few hours' sleep, and had come straight back each time, Aldecott was sent for. I helped bring him down. He was steadier than he had any right to be, but I could see what the 8 days had cost him, in the gray of his face, and the way he held his shoulders just a little less square than the first morning. We came into the hall where the prince was, and Aldecott crossed it and went down on one knee, stiff, slow, an old man's knee, and he drew the cord up over his head, and there it was, the iron key, plain and dark. The thing the whole house had bent itself around for 8 days, no bigger than your thumb, and he held it up in both hands. "Your Highness," he said, "Sergeant Bram Aldecott, I've held the key to the sealed study since your father died by the old rule to pass to your hand and no other. The door's never been opened. Nothing's gone in or out, it's all as he left it." He paused, and his voice didn't waver, but it deepened, the way it had with the Duchess. "And there's one thing I'm bound to tell you before another word's spoken, Your Highness. Your stepmother, the Duchess, came to this door. There's a letter inside your father wrote for her, his last in his own hand, the words he wanted said over him. It wasn't read at the graveside. She's been grieving for the want of it. I gave her my word that the first thing done behind that door would be to find that letter and put it in her hands, before the treaties, before the council, before anything. I'd ask you to let me keep that word." The young prince looked down at the kneeling old man, and at the key in his 2 hands, and I watched him understand slowly, the way you understand a thing that's bigger than you expected, that this old sergeant had stood 8 days against the whole weight of the house, including the Duchess herself, to keep a door shut, and that the very first use he was asking of the open door was to give that same Duchess the one thing she'd wanted all along. I think the prince understood in that moment something it takes most men a lifetime to learn, that the rule and the kindness weren't opposites, that the old man had kept the door shut so that the kindness, when it came, would be clean, would come from the right hand, in the right order, with nothing stolen and nobody's trust broken to get it. That you could be utterly immovable and utterly kind in the same breath, and that the one was what made the other mean anything. The prince took the key. "Stand up, Sergeant," he said. His voice cracked a little. He was 18 and tired, and his father was dead. "Stand up. You'll keep your word. We'll keep it together. Take me to the door." They opened the sealed study that afternoon, the prince's own hand on the key, Aldecott at his shoulder. And the letter was there. It was real. It had been real the whole time, which I have never stopped being glad of and never stopped being unsettled by. The prince read it first, as was his right, and then he sealed it again with his father's seal, and he sent for the Duchess, and when she came he gave it into her hands himself, with Aldecott standing witness, exactly as the old man had sworn. I'm told she wept when she read it. I wasn't there for that. Some things aren't for an underguard to see, and I'd not have wanted to. But I was there later, when it came out what else was behind that door, because there was something else. The will. The old king's true and final will, which the council had been so very eager to get at, which Lord Hesson's clerks had wanted so badly, which the whole soft campaign of cold food and pretty questions and reasonable captains had been bent toward reaching before the prince could. And when the prince read it with Aldecott in the room, it turned out the old king had changed it, near the end. Made provisions. Settled things in a way that certain people in that house had very much hoped to reach and revise, or lose, before an 18-year-old boy and his father's seal could make them law. If that door had opened once, just once, for the council's good reason or the captain's reasonable request or the widow's broken plea, any of them, it wouldn't have mattered which, those papers would have been in other hands for an hour unwatched, and a king's last will might have come out of that room different than it went in, or not come out at all. A whole reign turned on a closed door, and an old man who wouldn't open it. Nobody put up a statue. That's not how it works for men like Aldecott. The council didn't thank him. Half of them couldn't meet his eye after. The house went on. The prince became king in time and ruled well by all accounts, and I like to think a little of that was the lesson he learned at 18, kneeling in a hall, watching an old man hand him a key. Aldecott went back to ordinary watches. He never spoke of it again. When men told the story wrong, and they did, they made the Duchess a villain and Aldecott a stone and missed the whole heart of it. He never corrected them. He'd just go quiet and change the subject and ask after your family. He died years later, an old man in a warm bed, which I'm glad of because he'd earned a soft ending if any man had. I was there. I was an old guardsman myself by then, with young lads of my own to teach. And near the end he opened his eyes and looked at me, and he didn't say anything grand. He just said my name the way he had on the stair all those years ago, and then he said, "You walked up the stairs that morning. I never forgot it." And then he went. I've stood a lot of posts in my life. I've held doors and gates and secrets, and I've been leaned on by clever people with good reasons more times than I can count. And every single time in the dark, with the thing worth stealing close at hand and nobody to see, every time I have heard an old man's voice say I'd know. And I have kept the door shut. Because that's the whole of it in the end. Not the bravery you do in the light with the house watching and the trumpets ready. Any fool can be honest when honesty pays. It's the other thing. The cold, unwatched, unthanked thing. Standing at a door nobody's guarding but you, for a boy who doesn't know your name, against the only person in the world soft enough to break you, and not moving. The key belonged only to the Prince of the Vale. And one tired old man, who never raised his voice and never got his statue, made sure that it stayed that way.